Tutankhamun's mask is an icon. And I think part of it is because it is made of solid gold, and a lot of people get wowed by that.
For 3,300 years, the most famous face on Earth has been hiding something from us. And nobody knew, because nobody had the right tool to see it. Then a team of physicists pointed a quantum imaging scanner at King Tut's golden death mask, expecting nothing but a routine calibration. What appeared on their screens stopped the room cold. Buried beneath 22 pounds of solid gold, hidden in plain sight for 33 centuries, was something that should not exist. Something deliberately put there and just as deliberately erased. And once you see what it is, you cannot unsee it. Wonderful Things, November 1922. A British archaeologist named Howard Carter chisels a small hole into a sealed chamber in the Valley of the Kings. He raises a candle to the opening. His hands are not steady. When his patron leans in and asks whether he can see anything, Carter manages only a few words about wonderful things, and those few words would be repeated for the next 100 years. Inside lay a collection of treasures beyond anything anyone had dared to expect.
And when Lord Carnarvon, unable to stand the suspense any longer, inquired anxiously, "Can you see anything?" it was all I could do to get out the words, "Yes, wonderful things."
Golden chariots, jeweled thrones, painted statues frozen mid-motion, as if the figures might step forward at any moment and pick up a life that had paused 30 centuries earlier. But nested inside 3 coffins, each one fitting into the last like an elaborate puzzle, lay the one object that would seize the world's attention for generations to come: the golden death mask. I want you to really picture this thing, because no photograph does it justice. It weighs more than a bowling ball. 22 pounds of solid gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli and turquoise, with eyes of obsidian and quartz that seem to track you as you move across the room. The ancient Egyptians believed gold was the literal flesh of the gods, incorruptible and eternal. So this mask was never jewelry. It was sacred machinery, built to let the pharaoh's soul recognize its own body and find its way back on the long journey into the afterlife. Without it, the spirit would drift, lost for all of eternity. On the back, the craftsman carved a protective spell straight out of the Book of the Dead.
The sacred hieroglyphic text on the back of the mask contains a secret spell from the Book of the Dead.
Every single piece of it had a job to do. And here is the part almost nobody stops to think about. Tutankhamun was a nobody, a minor king who ruled for barely a decade and died as a teenager. He left almost no mark on the great monuments of Egypt. And within a few generations, his name was so completely forgotten that later kings built right over the entrance to his tomb without the faintest idea it was down there. That is the only reason his burial survived untouched, while every other royal tomb in the valley was stripped to the walls. A forgotten king is a king nobody bothers to rob, which is exactly what makes that mask impossible to explain. Why would the single finest piece of gold work to survive from the entire ancient world belong to the one pharaoh history had very nearly erased? For 100 years, we accepted this mask as the supreme achievement of ancient Egyptian art. Flawless, perfect. Made for a boy who died at 19. But almost from the moment it came out of the sand, a handful of experts kept noticing details that did not add up. And here is the strange part, the part that should bother you. None of that evidence was ever hidden. It sat in plain sight the whole time. We just refused to follow it, because following it would have meant admitting that everything we believed about this mask was wrong. So, let me show you the first thread nobody wanted to pull. The 70-day problem. Here is the question that should have been screamed from the rooftops the moment that tomb was opened. Tutankhamun died with no warning at all, most likely from an infection that set in after a brutal break to his leg. And Egyptian religious law did not bend for anyone. A pharaoh had to be mummified and sealed in his tomb within exactly 70 days. Not 69, not 71, 70. Now think about what that actually meant. 70 days to carve an entire royal tomb out of solid limestone. 70 days to build 3 elaborately nested coffins. 70 days to assemble thousands of burial objects, everyone prepared for a sacred purpose. And 70 days to produce a 22-pound mask of solid gold, inlaid with precious stones, covered in hand-carved hieroglyphic spells, for a death that absolutely no one had seen coming. It is not possible, not in 70 days, not for a king. Nobody had prepared for, and the tomb itself gives the whole thing away. It is strangely small for a pharaoh, almost embarrassingly cramped next to the grand burials of the other kings in the valley. Some of the wall paintings look unfinished, as if the artists set down their brushes mid-stroke and simply never came back. The massive stone sarcophagus has chipped corners, exactly the damage you would expect from workers forced to wrestle it into a space that barely held it. And when researchers actually cataloged the rest of that burial, they found something nobody wanted to say out loud. Most of it was not made for Tutankhamun, statues with faces that looked nothing like him, jewelry shaped for a woman's body, coffins with inscriptions hurriedly scraped off and recut with the boy king's name. The burial of the most famous pharaoh who ever lived looks less like a royal funeral and more like a frantic, panicked scramble to throw a king into the ground, using whatever happened to be lying within reach. Stop and let that sink in for a second, because this is the crack that everything else pours out of. The greatest gold work the ancient world ever produced, assembled in roughly the time it takes to plan a modern wedding. For a king, nobody had any reason to be preparing for the week before he died. Either the Egyptians pulled off something physically impossible in 2 months flat, or the truth is far simpler and far stranger than the version printed in your textbook. Then someone looked at the mask again. Not casually this time. Carefully. Subscribe. And before I show you what they found when they looked closely, do me one small favor. If you are the kind of person who wants the truth that has not made it into the textbooks yet, take 1 second right now and hit subscribe. This channel lives for exactly these stories, the ones they have not put in the official record. Because what comes next is the single detail that cracked this whole thing open. The pierced ears. The ears were pierced, and I need you to understand why that is not a small thing. In ancient Egypt, this broke every rule their sacred art was built on. Only children and women were ever shown with pierced ears. A grown male pharaoh, on the single most important object of his entire burial, the one thing meant to carry his soul through eternity, would never, under any circumstance, be shown with pierced lobes. And yet, there they were. 2 holes, each shaped a little differently from the other, clearly made to hold a pair of earrings. And once you see that, you start seeing the rest. The face is too delicate, too soft, almost feminine in its proportions. And the gold of the face carries a faint reddish tint that does not match the gold of the headdress around it, a difference in color that should be impossible if the whole thing had been poured from one batch of metal in one moment. So a theory started to form, the kind the field was terrified to say out loud. What if, when Tutankhamun died with no warning, there was no mask waiting for him at all? What if the priests racing that merciless 70-day clock grabbed a mask that had already been made for somebody else, changed it just enough to pass, and laid it over the boy king's face? And if that is what happened, then only one question matters. Who was the mask really made for? The answer that kept surfacing pointed straight at the most dangerous woman in the history of Egypt. The Vanishing Queen. Her name was Nefertiti. You already know her face, even if you do not realize it. The famous painted bust, the long, graceful neck, the calm, knowing expression that seems to look straight through you. She was Tutankhamun's stepmother, the great royal wife of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, the king who tried to tear down all of Egypt's ancient gods and replace them with a single sun disk. For a few short, violent years, she stood at the dead center of the most radical experiment in the entire history of the kingdom. And when her husband died, Nefertiti did something almost unheard of. A number of serious scholars believe she did not step quietly aside. They believe she took the throne herself and ruled Egypt as pharaoh in her own right under a brand new royal name. And then, at the very height of her power, she simply vanished. Her tomb has never been found. Her mummy has never been confirmed. She disappears from the record as cleanly as if someone reached back through time and scrubbed her out of it, on purpose, leaving nothing but that one beautiful face behind. And here is what kept the researchers awake at night. If Nefertiti died before Tutankhamun, and if a magnificent burial mask had already been made for her, and if the boy king then died suddenly with nothing of his own, ready the math lines up perfectly. The pierced ears fit, the feminine proportions fit, the faint mismatch in the gold fits, the rushed, sloppy changes fit. Every strange little detail that had nagged at the experts for decades clicks into place all at once. But a theory that fits is not proof, And proving it would have meant cutting into the mask, taking a blade to the most precious object the nation of Egypt owns. Nobody was ever going to allow that. So, for decades, the idea lived in the margins, whispered at conferences, laughed off by the establishment, impossible to confirm and impossible to kill. And there is a darker layer underneath it. Somebody went to enormous lengths to make Nefertiti disappear. After the religious revolution she and her husband led fell apart, the priests of the old gods took their revenge. They chiseled her name off the monuments, they smashed her statues, they tried to erase the entire era as if it had never happened. So, ask yourself this: if a queen was already being deleted from history, and she happened to own the most magnificent burial mask ever made, what cleaner way to finish the job than to take that mask, carve a forgotten boy's name into it, and let the world spend 3,000 years staring at a face whose true owner they would never name. And then, in 2014, someone broke the mask, and that one clumsy accident would crack the whole thing wide open. The broken beard. The story hit international news within days. During a routine cleaning at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, a worker knocked the mask. The long braided beard, a sacred symbol of divine pharaonic authority, snapped clean off. And what happened next was almost worse than the break. Instead of calling in trained conservators, the museum staff panicked. They grabbed whatever was closest: epoxy, industrial strength glue, the kind meant for plumbing and car repairs. They smeared it on, jammed the beard back into place, and prayed nobody would notice. Everybody noticed. The glue had dried in a crooked, ugly smear across the golden chin of one of the most sacred objects human hands have ever made. Egypt's greatest treasure, perfect for 33 centuries, had just been patched together with hardware store adhesive. The humiliation was enormous, and the Egyptian government answered it by assembling an international restoration team led by a German conservator named Christian Ekman. On paper, his job was simple: strip off the epoxy, reattach the beard properly with materials the ancient Egyptians would have recognized. But Ekman understood he had just been handed something far more valuable than a repair job. He had been handed permission to look inside the mask. That Nefertiti question had been circling for decades, and now, finally, he had a way to put it to rest for good. Case closed. His logic was airtight. If the face had been cut from a different mask and grafted onto this one, a scan would catch it. Different batches of gold, hidden solder seams, the chemical fingerprints of reworking. So, before he reattached a single thing, Ekman scanned the whole surface with X-ray fluorescence, a technology that reads the elemental makeup of metal. His team spent months on it, mapping every millimeter, and the results looked like they closed the case for good. The gold of the face matched the gold of the headdress. The hieroglyphs spelling out the boy king's name showed no sign of being carved over anything older. The fragile glass inlays around the eyes were perfectly undisturbed, and any attempt to solder on a replacement face would have shattered them instantly from the heat alone. Case closed. The Nefertiti theory was declared dead. The mask, the experts announced, was 100% Tutankhamun's, made for him and him alone. Ekman lifted off the epoxy, reattached the beard with beeswax exactly the way the original craftsman would have, and the mask went back into its case. The history books did not change a word, except a small group of scientists refused to accept it. The blind spot. Their objection was technical, and it was devastating. X-ray fluorescence, they argued, has a fatal blind spot. It can read density. It can find cracks, nicks, solder joints. But it rests on one quiet assumption, that anyone who altered the mask would have left behind the ordinary, messy traces of a repair. And what if the people who changed this object were working at a level of skill no normal scan could ever touch? What if they filled those pierced ears with gold pulled from the very same original batch, so the chemistry matched perfectly? What if they hammered the original name flat before carving the new one over it, leaving no raised edge for an X-ray to catch? What if they fixed a replacement face in place so precisely that the seam between old metal and new was only a few atoms thick? An X-ray would see nothing. It would report smooth, unbroken, undisturbed gold, and it would be telling the truth as far as it could see. Because here is the limit nobody likes to talk about. X-rays cannot read the thermal history of metal. They cannot tell gold that was poured once from gold that was reheated, reworked, and beaten into a new shape. but the atoms themselves remember. They keep a record of every time they were forced to move. To read that record, you would need something else entirely, something that could listen to the memory locked inside the metal at the atomic level. Think about what that means for a moment. For 60 years, the single most studied object in all of archaeology had been keeping a secret in a language no instrument on Earth could read. Not because anyone had hidden it well enough, because we had been asking the metal the wrong question, with the wrong kind of light. By 2024, that something existed. The Midnight Scan. Dr. Helene Voss is a materials physicist at the Max Planck Institute in Munich. Her specialty is quantum resonance imaging, a method so new it barely exists outside of classified laboratories. In late 2024, her team got permission from the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities to run a single, non-invasive scan of the mask. Officially, it was nothing special, a calibration exercise. They just wanted to confirm their equipment behaved properly on ancient gold. They were not looking for anything Ekman's people had missed. If anything, they expected to prove the case was already closed. The scan ran after the Grand Egyptian Museum had emptied for the night. The scanner hummed in the dark. The mask sat motionless under the beam. Data poured onto the laptop screens in real time, and for hours it all came back exactly as expected. Then the beam reached the cartouche, the oval frame around the boy king's royal name. Dr. Tariq Mansour, an Egyptologist from Cairo University who was in the room that night, said the silence went total. On the screen, beneath the carved hieroglyphs, the quantum imager was lighting up a pattern that had no right to be there. A field of atomic displacement found nowhere else on the entire surface of the mask. The gold in that one exact spot had been hammered, scraped, and worked over from the ground up. Voss had the technician run it again. The result did not move. She ordered a full recalibration of the equipment. The result still did not move. Dr. Aiko Nakamura, a metallurgist watching the live feed from Kyoto, later admitted she could not, at first, let herself believe what she was seeing. But the reading was not ambiguous. Someone, long ago, had wiped out the original hieroglyphs inside that cartouche and carved brand new ones over the top. And that was not even the most unsettling thing the night would reveal. Not even close. What the X-rays missed. They ran a full structural analysis, and piece by piece, it tore down a century of certainty. First, the ears. Where the X-rays had seen solid, unbroken gold, the quantum scan saw something else completely. Two perfect cylindrical plugs. Someone had filled the original piercings with rods of identical gold alloy, then hammered and polished the surface down until no seam was left, until the change was invisible to every imaging tool that existed before 2024. The ears had been deliberately sealed shut. This mask had belonged to someone who wore earrings. Then, the face. The quantum imager picked up what Voss called thermal ghosting, running the entire length of the line where the face meets the headdress. Thermal ghosting is a molecular signature. It means the gold along that exact outline was once brought to a different temperature than the metal around it. The craftsman had not soldered the new face on from the front. That would have shattered the glass inlays instantly. They attached it from behind, with a high-pressure heating process that left the visible surface completely untouched. The seam was invisible to X-rays, but the atoms kept the record for 3,000 years. The face had been cut out and replaced, and the room had gone very, very quiet. The name beneath Mansour was the first to break the silence. He asked if the scanner could rebuild whatever had been erased under the current inscription. Voss said it could. By mapping the microscopic traces left by the original hammering, the faint ghost impressions of that first set of carved symbols, the system could digitally reconstruct what had been written there before anyone touched it. She started the program. The reconstruction took 11 minutes. Slowly, one line at a time, the original hieroglyphs took shape on the screen. Nakamura, watching from Kyoto, said afterward that nobody in either room seemed to be breathing. The name built itself one symbol at a time. And it was not Tutankhamun, it was Neferneferuaten, the throne name historians believe Nefertiti took when she ruled Egypt as pharaoh in her own right. The name of a woman they had spent 3,000 years pretending never existed, hiding under the chin of the most famous king on earth. And the second they saw it, they understood they were no longer looking at a theory. They were looking at the crime itself. The stolen face. From the data, the team could reconstruct the whole sequence. Everything that happened 3,300 years ago, inside a single, desperate season. When Tutankhamun died without warning, there was no burial mask for him. His powerful successor, an aging court official named Ai, had most likely already claimed the grand tomb meant for the boy king and taken it for his own. So the priests in charge of the funeral were trapped, 70 days on the clock. No mask, no tomb worthy of a king, no time to make either one. So they went to the tomb of the ruler before him. They went to Nefertiti, and they got to work. They pulled her burial mask off the dead. They filled her pierced ears with gold from the same original batch, hammering until no trace of the holes remained. They had a new face made, carved with the soft young features of the boy king. They cut Nefertiti's face away and fixed Tutankhamun's on from behind. With a technique so precise, the joint stayed invisible for 3,000 years. They beat her royal name flat. They carved his name where hers had been. And then they buried their king wearing a stolen face, and they buried the truth in the dark right beside him, certain it would never see daylight again. The mask sits today in the Grand Egyptian Museum. Millions of people walk past it every year, certain they are looking at Tutankhamun. But under that gold surface, the ghost of a vanished queen has been waiting in the dark for 3,300 years until a machine finally learned to listen to the memory of atoms. Sit with the symmetry of that for a second. For 3,000 years, we have called this the face of a boy. We built our whole picture of ancient Egypt around it. The wide eyes, the calm expression, the gentle line of the jaw. All of it became shorthand for the civilization itself. And all of it may have been lifted from a woman the priests of her own time tried so hard to erase that they reached into her tomb and took the last thing she had left. They never imagined the metal would keep her secret, and they never imagined that one day a beam of light would read what they had hammered flat and hand her name back. What else was taken? Now, none of this has been formally published yet. The findings are still being verified, still being argued over behind closed doors, still being contested by people whose entire careers depend on the old version of the story staying true. There are powerful people who would much rather this never reach the official record at all, but the data is out in the world now, and the questions it forces open are not going away. Because if the mask was taken from Nefertiti's tomb, then what else in that burial chamber was never Tutankhamun's to begin with? How many of those golden treasures, the ones photographed for 100 years and printed in every textbook on the shelf, were dragged out of other tombs in the same frantic 70-day scramble? How much of what we think we know about the most famous pharaoh, whoever lived, is actually borrowed from the dead lying around him? And one question sits over all the others. If they took Nefertiti's mask and gave it to Tutankhamun, then where is her real one? The mask truly made for her, carved with her actual face. And if her mask ended up on the boy king, then whose mask, if anyone's, was laid over the face of the vanished queen? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you believe the priests really robbed a queen's tomb to bury their king? Or is there another explanation still buried in that gold? And if you want more stories they have not put in the official record yet, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and stay curious.